you have to be very careful about selecting what you're measuring, how you're measuring it, because if you set out KPIs for your managers, guess what? Your managers are going to deliver on their KPIs regardless of it actually being the action that propels the business forward.
Welcome to the Thrive Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Potter, and we're dedicated to guiding tech founders and entrepreneurs along the path to success. Let's dive into today's blueprint for success. I'm privileged to introduce Kevin Peterson, Chief Operating Officer of DataCapable, and Pete DiSalvo, Chief Executive Officer for DataCapable. So Kevin, data has become a buzzword. It's more than that. How do you see data-driven decisions reshaping the tech landscape?
Well, I think first and foremost, we're awash with data. Historically, getting the data was the hardest part of data-driven decision-making in an organization. And now with the tools that we have out there, it's much easier to gather internal data, and it's even easier to gather external data. So the problem or the challenge has shifted from getting data to making sure you're getting good data and you're deriving the right insights out of that data.
And how do you use that data? Are you personalizing your products to the needs of the audience?
Yeah, I think again, like there's internal data and there's external data. That external data is definitely a driver on how we're shaping products. So we're able to measure things much more granularly. We're able to understand the behaviors inside of the product, how the product's being used, what the platforms that the product is being used on, what are the interfaces that they're being used in. So that allows us a lot deeper insight. But anytime we venture down this journey of data, I lay out a word of caution because it's very easy to look at data and derive insights from the data, but just because you have insights doesn't mean they're actually real insights into the business or into the customer behavior. So you have to look at data from with a judicious view on it, because otherwise, as much as data can inform and make decisions better, it can also take you down that path of misunderstanding the data. And now if all you're doing is relying on data to drive those insights and decisions, and not looking more broadly about understanding your people, understanding your customer, you can't just use data alone. Otherwise, the risk is you jump down the wrong direction, and then all of a sudden, all of the rest of your metrics aren't what you think they should have been from that outcome, and it's far too late. You've made the mistake. Now it's how do you recover from it?
Well, there's no doubt that data can help you make quicker, more informed decisions, but as you're saying, they could be the wrong decisions. Pete, as CEO, how are you using data to shape your internal decisions to be able to respond to competition more quickly?
Well, did I mention we're capable of data? Data capable? But we use it in every part of the business. And part of it is to give strategic advantage externally, so identifying new markets that maybe our competition hasn't, or really target our audience in ways that our competitors aren't. But then even internally, like operationally, are there things our team's doing repetitively that we can automate or simplify, or even schedules and efficiency? Like, are our developers spending too much time in meetings versus how many times they're committing code to the repository? So every angle, including financial metrics as well. And Kevin made a good point about we don't have a data problem anymore. We have tons of data, and we can look at each data point, but by themselves, they don't tell you a whole lot. And that could work to your advantage sometimes. Like, oh, look at this metric. Look how good I'm doing. But then when you combine it with other metrics, it tells a bigger story. And we've gone from data to insights and intelligence, I think, is the goal. Bring all these pieces together to shed some light on what's happening.
And when we think about internal data and metrics and measurements in the business, I always hearken back to the old adage that Peter Drucker, kind of one of the fathers of modern business, he brought two approaches to the business, having a people-centered business and a metric-driven business. And you always hear the adage that what is measured is what is managed. Mm-hmm. Almost everybody who's been in business has heard that quote. The piece of the quote that everybody that has been dropped over the years. So the quote was made in the mid 60s, right? So it's gone through evolution and evolution. But the piece that got lost over time is that what is measured is what is managed, even if it's not significant to the business to either measure or manage. And then he takes it one step further, which is really like, that's your aha moment in his quote, even if it is destructive to the business. So you have to be very careful about selecting what you're measuring, how you're measuring it, because if you set out KPIs for your managers, guess what? Your managers are going to deliver on their KPIs regardless of it actually being the action that propels the business forward.
We've experienced that many times in various clients. So, metrics are vital. And with regard to the financial data, can you shed some light on how financial data intertwines with other KPIs to shape the bigger picture?
You want to take a swing at that first?
Yeah, sure.
Pete?
So as the CEO, my responsibilities include strategy and goals. And some of the main financial metrics I look at are not only our customer acquisition cost, because that is important, but how does that relate to the lifetime value? And the standard for SaaS businesses should be 1 to 3. So your lifetime value of a customer should be 3 times what it costs to acquire them. And so those two metrics together give you an idea, like, are we spending too little on sales or too much? And kind of gives a sense of like, where might you be able to improve? And in our case, we're spending much less than we could, which is a good place to be. Some other metrics, churn rate. So we keep track of that on a monthly basis, make sure that's on track. Gross margin is a really important one. I would say anything above 70% is good for a SaaS business. We want to be 80% or higher and stay there. And just kind of these general guidelines, combine them together and helps me make strategic decisions for the future.
And building off from that a little bit, I think there's a few points when you think about your metrics, and I alluded to the challenge of having the wrong metrics. The other piece is having the right depth to your metrics. So when you look at something like our customer acquisition cost, mm-hmm. it's a good overall number, and we track it towards a target. But you also have to layer metrics further, more granular metrics into the process, because just knowing that your customer acquisition costs are moving in the right direction or the wrong direction isn't enough to make decisions as a business. It's indicative of a problem in the business, but if you aren't measuring the metrics, taking customer acquisition costs, okay, where are those customer acquisition costs being driven up? Is it in the marketing part
or the selling part?
Exactly.
Right. Pete, from your experience, can you share a moment where leveraging data analytics gave DataCapable a significant edge over its competitors?
Yeah, there's a few angles. The first example might be internally, as a leader in the organization, looking at our leadership team and seeing how much time are they spending one-on-one with their team, which tells me we're still driving culture in the right direction. Our team's well-connected, working together, which is really important to success. And externally, first of all, nailing down our ideal client profile and using data to target them as much as possible. So regionally or through advertising platforms, and really hone in on that. Also trends, keeping a pulse on trends that are coming in the future. So every angle gives us an advantage.
And to get really specific on this one, a change that we made in the business that was driven off from the data is we have a product that we call Threat Detector. That product, we had a UI that product existed in, and through looking at the data, we knew we weren't getting the engagement that we had anticipated or expected in the product, which is indicative of maybe the product isn't getting used and delivering the value that it should. So after digging through those numbers, looking at the fact that there was a disconnect here, we came to the realization that our UI just wasn't as optimized as it needed to be to drive that engagement into the UI. So based on that usage data of the product, or the lack of usage of the product, or in particular the UI, we knew we had to pivot, and we knew we had to redesign that UI. So we took it right back to the basics, and we rebuilt that UI from the bottom up. Particularly because of the analytics and the data was telling us that it wasn't serving the purpose that we had designed it to do.
And I want to add to that too. So that's kind of like overall usage. But then when we look at anticipated usage of each product based on other factors, which might be between 9 and 5 in the time zone where the utility is, but it's heavily dependent on weather as well. So on a bluebird day, there's traffic and usage of our platform, but when we see a hurricane coming up the coast, we anticipate that using data, like we're watching weather data, and we ramp up and scale up so we can prepare for the storm. Not only scale up the software, but have the team ready to respond and be there for our customers.
You know, predictive analytics is currently the talk of the town. Pete, how do you envision its impact on the tech sector in the upcoming years? You know, there's a lot of talk about AI and machine learning that can aid in predictive analytics. How do you use that at DataCapable?
Predictive analytics is the holy grail, and that's where we want to be, and I think that's where the future is going. I'd love to see our threat detector product predicting these events long before they happen. The difficult part is how is it predicting, and what information is it using to predict? And this future prediction is totally based on history, and that's not necessarily always true. So the information that's fed into this AI and these algorithms in the training is really important.
Yeah, and I don't think we're in a place yet where predictive analytics is really accurate language. I think where we're at today is having enough analytics to be proactive, so that you are better managing situations. You are getting ahead of the game, so you're not reacting. You're now trying to be proactive. But I think true prediction, we've still got a lot of work to do before we get there.
Well, but Kevin, that brings up the point of data quality. You're saying that that's paramount. You know, what measures does DataCapable employ to ensure you're acting on reliable and accurate analytics?
Yeah, so I think the key here is you have to be curious. You have to be inquisitive. You can't take everything that's handed to you based on face value, right? So
how do you verify that then?
You have to ask questions. You have to look. You have to validate. I come from a science background, so the scientific method is core to everything I do and how I think about things, and this is a perfect place to apply that scientific method. The challenge is, if you think about scientific method, you always have a control group. In this case, we don't really have a control group, but we do our best to try to create that control group based on what we should expect with factors that are not the factors that we're actually trying to tease out in that data.
Kevin, with an overwhelming array of data sources, how should firms prioritize which metrics to focus on and which to disregard?
Yeah, that's a really fantastic question, and I think when you're deciding what metrics you should be tracking, you need to start with what are the goals of the organization, and making sure that you understand what those goals are. Because as I said earlier, what is measured is what is managed. So if you aren't aligning your metrics with your goals of the organization, you're probably not going to be driving the behavior that you want out of your employees. So right out of the gate, like, you need to start with a good goal development process. So you need to start with SMART goals, specific, measurable, actionable, time-bound, and relevant. I messed up the order of the. I do know how to spell SMART, trust me. But that is where you need to start. So understand what your goals of the organization are, and then what are the metrics that will drive you towards those goals. In a well-developed, a well-defined, a very mature business, these don't change on you that much. Like, your organization is direction is well-defined. It's moving in that direction. Your metrics are mature. At a very early stage in your business, you have limited resources. You have to make choices on where you're going to focus effort, on what you're going to measure. So you have to, like I said, you have to make strategic choices about what metrics you're going to follow. And with that said, that has to line up with the stage of your business. If you're focused purely on revenue metrics from day one, you're probably not driving the right behavior. Depending on the stage of your business, the cycle of your business, your metrics need to change with that. In a traditional business, it's your revenue, right? It's your profitability. Those are always your metrics. And in the tech world, that isn't always the case. Your near-term goals might be building your user base. It might be extending your contracts so you have flexibility in your business. So you need to have those metrics that line up with what those goals are ultimately.
Yeah,
And with the life cycle of the business.
Yes, for sure.
I was going to add to that part. Like, maybe building your product is probably the first thing you want to do. Build it so your metrics should be there. Then eventually selling, but then new feature adoption as well is important. Are people using the features you're putting out that can help you decide what's coming next? Or do you want to drive more of that behavior?
And then when you get to a late stage, obviously the valuation metrics are important.
Yeah.
Kevin, I want to follow up on another subject. The role of data scientists has taken center stage. Can you describe the evolving role and their influence on the tech industry?
Yeah, I don't think you have to look too far to understand how impactful the role of data scientists are in an organization today. If you just take a quick market scan, you'll realize that there is a bevy of C-suite titles that are associated with data scientists. It's data scientists that are sitting in the role. You have chief analytic officer. You have chief data scientist. All of these roles, if they're having a role in the executive room, then the business is acutely aware of what the impacts of that role are, and what the role of the data is in the business. And it's been an evolution, and it continues to be an evolution. And you need to be in the right place of your business when you start to make those elevations. But you need to be acutely aware of what the role of the data scientist is, what the data scientist is pumping out, putting into your organization, and ensuring that they have the right level of access, the right level of control, and the right level of authority in the organization.
Well, having all those titles in a startup may be challenging for a tech-led founder. Are there alternatives to having all those C-level sophisticated data scientists, data analytics? I mean, are there fractional people that can come in and help a startup guide that process?
I think there are fractional people. I think, at least in the early stages, leveraging consultants can work in this case. I think the other piece here is there's lots of tools out there. Like this isn't something that's nascent anymore. There are a lot of data analytic tools out there. There's a lot of data visualization tools out there. So in the early stages, leverage the technology because you probably don't have the pocketbook at that point in time, to bring in a C-level executive to be the driving force of that in your business. And the reality is, the early stage of the business, the founders, the 2 or 3 top level people in the organization, they have to wear lots of hats, and they have to figure out how to creatively solve problems. So this is one of those cases where you might not be an expert in it, but there's lots of educational material out there. There's lots of reading. There's lots of free university courses. There are certificate programs in this out there from a lot of the leading universities. There's lots of ways to start incorporating this into the business and building the knowledge within the team that you have. You don't have to just go out and acquire a resource to bring into your business.
I'd be really cautious about an early stage startup hiring an executive. You don't need an executive or a C-suite until you're 5 million in recurring revenue or higher, maybe. So if there's a data scientist or anybody demanding that they're an executive, day one of a startup, I'd be careful.
Good point. Pete, ethics and data are a hot topic. Can you discuss the challenges and considerations surrounding data privacy and utilization in tech?
Yeah, there's a lot of responsibility to consider when you're not only handling the data and selecting the data to use, but training the models that you're deriving insights from. And typically, the output's only as good as the input. So you really have to be fair when you're selecting what you're looking at in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion. You want to make sure you have all those pieces. And that part makes me think of some algorithms. Maybe it doesn't happen today, but some of the algorithms that could identify people in pictures. And they found that certain ethnic groups weren't identified in the photos because they used a training data set that was a lot of the same looking people. So it couldn't figure things out. So there's a responsibility in that aspect, but also keeping people's private data safe, or don't use private data at all to begin with.
Well, there's certifications like PCI. Is that part of what you're talking about as well?
Yeah, and from my perspective, I'm not an expert in this area, so we would hire an expert to make sure we have all that covered.
I see.
Yeah, and I think one of the most challenging pieces of this equation is the evolving regulatory environment. That one of the biggest challenges of managing a business is managing uncertainty, and this area today has still a lot of uncertainty around it. And then if you're starting to think outside of just your little sphere, maybe you're serving just the US population only, if you want to expand into other countries, other areas, there's no consistency across what the regulatory environment looks like here. And it does concern me a little bit, because my fear is all of this regulation is going to create a barrier of entry for new companies coming in, and we're not going to see the innovation around this that we would hope to see. I don't know if that's going to come to fruition, but as long as this area is so quickly changing, so quickly evolving, and has so much uncertainty in it, it's going to be a challenge for new tech companies coming into the. And not just the challenge, it presents a lot of risk to the company as well.
What advice would you give to a tech startup? Their products could go worldwide fairly quickly. And what do we have? The GDPR, and California has its own very restrictive data privacy and security. What advice do you have to one of our audience that is a tech startup having to deal with what authoritative source can they go to?
Well, I think
would you recommend a consultant such as?
Yeah, I think that's the challenge, is there isn't an authoritative source that's going to cover all of your bases, and you will end up completely mired in this regulatory environment. And the reality is, most tech startups haven't had a lot of experience in the legal world, in the regulatory world, so it's all very foreign to them. This is a perfect place to bring in expertise. and continue to consult that expertise over time. Let them keep up with the regulatory environment, bring that expertise in as needed, but don't start too late in the process, because if you don't bring in the expertise early, the risk is you're going to this fruit is going to die on the vine before you ever get to some place where your vision starts to become reality.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna harp on, was get that insight early on, because if your strategy is based on things you can't actually do in the future, you've wasted a ton of time, and speed is the most important part of a startup.
I agree. Well, thank you for this valuable input. And thanks for tuning in to the Thrive podcast. If this episode has added value to your journey, please share, subscribe, and please leave us a review. For all the tech founders and entrepreneurs out there, I encourage you to visit our website, thriveadvisors.com. And remember, most businesses do hit a stagnation phase, and Thrive Advisors is here to build you the right strategy, set it into motion, and steer your venture to success and a profitable exit. Until next time, thanks for joining us.